All right, so into our next chapter, um, we're going to get into basically masonry openings, adding in doors and windows, and that sort of stuff. So as you can see, the way that I I think about putting a model together, it's in a very sequential set of steps. Where you begin with massing, and then you add a roof because the roof is really part of the massing as well, and then you start adding in your doors and windows. And to a degree, a lot of this stuff really is the pieces that uh, even though a lot of this will get adjusted and moved as we design. This is really about having pieces that are known, and then we can start adding additional layers on to create the final model. So with that said, I'm going to open this up. So uh, you guys have probably seen this before. This is my window directory, if you will. This is all just casement windows. I have another one for single hung. I'm in the process of making an additional one for all my arches. We just don't use them a whole lot, so I haven't spent a lot of time on it. And everybody should have a link to it, but let me open up where it is on the server. This is my server here, but let me get to the Boca one. I believe it's in marketing. No, not marketing. Architect, thank you. Yeah, and then library SketchUp. And if you guys haven't used these yet, I've talked about them before, but obviously going through this process, you're really going to see my process and use what you guys think makes sense. But this file here, this library collections, this is where I have a lot of things that I use when I really get into the meat of my building. Because to this point, we've done our massing, we've done our roof, and that's really all the very project specific types of things. Because windows are windows, doors are doors, and trims will kind of be a little custom as well, but still there are certain things that we can pull. And we'll probably touch on most of these throughout this whole process. But you can see I try to really divide them up. So all my doors I have here, from exterior garage doors. And you'll see this one here. Says garage CDs. Ignore that one for now. That really was a testing out of being able to create construction drawings, which we'll probably eventually use this stuff. But from a design standpoint, just stick with garage. This is all the different garage doors I have. Nano door, sliding glass door, swing, all that good kind of stuff. And my window ones are here. And this is the one, this window casement is the one I have open now. And just a quick general overview, and we'll probably get into most of this stuff next week when we get into trims. You see I have this group here called elevations, in which I have, you can see chimneys, gutters, columns, railings, lights, all that good kind of stuff. And it just gives me a great visual way to see all the stuff that we have and continually add to it, so that we can either create something custom from something we already have, or just we have something that works. So that's just my quick overview of everything, and really where the casement is found. And again, that's see M library SketchUp, and then library collections. So with that said, let's get into discussion of windows. And most of this class is actually going to be more about the overall process and not so much the project that we've been working on. Though we'll do a little bit of that, but there's like a bigger picture that I really want to get across. And the reason why I have all these windows built, and there's actually a ton of information packed into these, even though they look pretty simple. So, and then let me pull this over. You should be seeing my layers panel now. And you'll see that there's some layers, and we're really going to talk about all these and how these windows are constructed. So let me just go into here and grab one of these very basic ones, very typical 2650. So you can see it's set up as a matrix, that this is a 1 foot, 1'6", 2 foot, 2'6", all the way on. I have built up to 4 foot, and then So across the top is the width, and then along the side is the height. So you see if I need a 2650 window, it's that one right there. And before I get into the inner workings, I'm going to kind of show you some stuff of how these windows work from a bigger picture perspective, and then we'll essentially dissect a window so you can see what information is packed into here and how you can manipulate it. So the way I work is, say I need this 2650 window, I'm going to hit Control C, which I just copied it. It's simply right here, Control C copy. I'm going to go into this file here. And so everybody knows that there's two distinct ways of modeling. There's essentially what I've been preaching, solid models versus what I call paper models. So here, this is just a single face. You see there's no thickness to it. It's not grouped. There's nothing special about it. It's just literally a single face. And in fact, even if I wanted to pull this all the way out, this could even tell the story a little better, where again, these are all faces. There's no solids about it. There's no groups about it. And a lot of times this is how we all start modeling. We're not worrying about wall thicknesses and all that kind of stuff because we're really showing the shell of the project. Or you can get into the slightly more advanced way, which is the way that I try to model everything, and to me it just makes sense. Here I have the exact same box, but this has 8-inch thick walls, and it's a solid. I can go into the group and you can see I can grab everything there, but if I stay out, you can see it's a solid. So the window that I copied, if I now come here and hit Control V, I can paste it anywhere onto here, and as you would expect, it cuts a hole in the wall. All of these are made so that you can cut a hole in the wall, or they're made to cut a hole in the wall. If I move this around, it cuts a hole in the wall. So it's very typical window component. And it's great that you're able to do this, to cut a hole in the wall. But the reason why I came to a crossroads a few years ago of trying to decide of how I want to model, where the idea of solids and the efficiency that I'm able to gain by modeling in solids won out versus the efficiency of having a window that cuts the wall on its own. And you'll see that a little bit more in a second, because if I come here onto this wall that's a solid, if I copy and paste this window onto here, you see that it does not cut out because it's a solid, so there is no surface for it to cut. Everybody following? It's pretty basic, but so I make sure everybody's on the same page. So what I do, it is a little bit more of a step up front, but I think in the long run it really speeds a lot of things up. That I just paste it wherever I need to. Even if I come here and I'm just gonna just copy a reference line up, say this is the height of all of our windows. I can come here, put it, wherever I need to, move it, say I want it in the center. So that's where I want it. I'm gonna get rid of my reference line. So now I'm inside this group. In fact, I'm gonna hit Shift H, which is hide rest of model. And you can see I'm only looking at my walls right now. But if I hit Shift H again and put the rest of the model back on, I'm seeing my window. And hopefully you can see it. The window itself is a little grayed out because it's outside of my group. And now if I just hit rectangle and I can trace it, I can pull this, the 8 inches through. And again, hiding rest of the model, you see I just cut out essentially my masonry opening. So when they build it, this is essentially what they would build, the masonry opening, and then the windows themselves have the 2-inch buck built into it. So my 2'6", window has the 2 inches extra around it. So it kind of fits with our construction drawings as is. And so now we're building a masonry wall that has a masonry opening. And you can see my window is there. It looks, pretty identical to this. except I have a lot more information on the right side versus the left because I have thick walls and all that sort of stuff. So those are really the two big differences in the way that you can use the windows, but the way that they're built from a bigger perspective, they were done this way so that you can use the windows in either method of modeling. If you're just trying to do a quick down and dirty, what I call paper model, you can see that these windows still work just fine. There's nothing wrong with them to use it in this paper model way. Uh, and then you can see the method I use to use them in more of a solid modeling way. And we'll move forward into the actual project we're working on. You'll see more examples of how I populate my whole model this way. And so we'll get into a little bit more specifics there. So any questions so far as to when and how I use these windows in the two different ways? Okay, good. So now to take a little bit of a step back, we're looking at the windows themselves. And if either of you has ever built a component, like a window component very specifically, that cuts a hole in the wall, you'll understand this process. But I'm just going to show a very quick version just to do it, because I think the more that you understand the theory of how all this stuff is built, the more you can understand of why certain things are done. So this is just a blank wall, and just as a reference, these are all quote-unquote special windows that I don't have inside my matrix, because within the matrix you see I have single windows occur here. These are doubles and these are triples. And then similarly, I have singles, doubles, triples, but with a 2-foot transom built in. So that's why there's these two different groups. And some of these special windows are just if I needed quadruples. And eventually I'll probably build a quadruple layer into the matrix, but they just haven't occurred as often as enough for me to warrant building them, to where I've just built a couple of, some of the ones that I really needed. Or there's some special sizes that I didn't have or whatever. So anything that didn't fit to the matrix, I just have floating over here right now. And you'll see that, like, say, if I click on any one of these, the definition, I try to be very specific on how I named everything. So this one here, you can see is 4. So everything, the first number always starts with the number of windows built into it. So you can see this is a quadruple, 3.0 by 6.0 casement enclosure. And the enclosure is the nomenclature that I use for the complete group. Because if I come into this, you'll see if I click on these individual windows, these are actually all components as well. And you can see that this is a 3.0/6.0 window block. And so the window block means that this is literally the window in of itself, not the entire enclosure. So this 3.0/6.0 window, being a component, is the same 3.0/6.0 window that sits inside of this right here. So this, as you can see right here, this is a 1 3.0/6.0 enclosure. But if I come inside, this component is the exact same component. And where that becomes helpful is whether I have, a double 3.0 or a quadruple or a triple or a single, if I need to update the window in and of itself, it still updates across the board. And to show that, let me see if, so if I come in here to edit this, this window, yeah, so I'm editing this window right now. If I zoom out, I think you can see all the ghosted images of all the different 3.0/6.0 windows that are floating out there. So if this is, say, my project and we don't want, or we want to do a mullion structure that is, say, a 4 by instead of a 6 by, I can just move the 1 down, delete it, and now you can see that this is the one I updated. And if I come over here, this quadruple, see how this one updated as well. So that's why there's essentially a component within a component. So the window, the bones of the window in of itself, that's inside of the bigger enclosure, is a component within a component. So it's just something to be aware of. I'm going to undo all that just to put my everything back to normal. And so we're actually going to talk a little bit more about mullions in just a second. So that's kind of the really bigger picture. But to talk about how these windows are built in general, and really this discussion is going to be the exact same for doors. So I'm not going to go through doors, but just know that they're both built the exact same method, just doors are going to be taller. So if I come into my 3060, I'm going to start breaking down the pieces that you see. Actually, let me take a step back. I wanted to show you this. This is what I started with. So if I to build a component, if I push a wall through, and I just pushed it in 8 inches, so all it is whatever size it is, it doesn't matter. If I go to X-ray mode, you can see that this wall was pushed in 8 inches. If I highlight everything, right click on it and say make component, the really important piece is you want this button right here checked where it says cut opening, and you can actually specify where you want it to glue to. So right now it's glued to any surface. You can say only horizontal surfaces, only vertical, only sloped. I've never really come across a need to specify where it glues to. Leaving it as any has always worked well for me. Here's where you can name the component, whatever you want to call it, and then you can set component axes. I like to make the top middle for Windows to be the where the axis occurs, and then that's it. So I click create. It's actually going to take a second because I have a lot of components in here. All right, there we go. For whatever reason, it did not cut. Let me just see if I move this. Weird. That's weird. It didn't build the component properly. No idea why it didn't work there. I'm actually going to build this in here just because there's a lot less information, so it should move a little quicker. So again, same thing. I'm going to draw a rectangle, inset it 8 inches, select everything, make component, glue to any, set my axes, then create. Wow. Not. So you're saying, not to push it in first, but it wouldn't cut but there's no hole for it to cut. I don't know why it's not cutting. That's really weird. Let me just maybe leave the axes as is. Yeah, maybe changing the axes was an issue because this one worked. I mean, here all I have to do, you can actually, right after you make it, right click and change axes after you make it. But yeah, there's something weird about the axes movement. That's what's causing the issue. It's just the insertion point. It's the same with AutoCAD. You're basically specifying your 0, 0. There's no pure necessity for it to have a proper insertion point, other than consistency. And whenever you cut and paste, it's going to paste it by its origin point. But you can also just move it. So you can see that my axis is there now. If you saw what I did, let me redo that again. So I'm editing the component right now, and you can see my bottom left is my insertion point. I'm just going to move it by the top middle and snap it to the origin, and it really does the same thing. As you can see, there's my insertion point. So anyway, so if you haven't done it, that's how you make a window block. Now to get back to the bigger picture of of how these windows are made and what's embedded inside of them. So coming back here to this one, if I come inside of here, you saw that previously if I pushed in, let me just show it real quick. If I push in, and if we pretend that this is my, in fact, I'll turn it to a group, and this is my my window, you can see that everything inside of here is loose geometry. There's no groups inside of it because we just basically put all this loose geometry inside of a group. And that's how most windows are typically made, and they're left there, and then you can fill it in with whatever you want to. I actually took everything a couple steps further. So if I come back inside of here, what used to be loose geometry, in fact, this one I have not updated yet, so it's a bad choice. But let me actually do one thing real quick. Because in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm taking all of this geometry. So it's basically, I'm going to hide everything. So this is essentially the 8-inch thick wall, that got pushed back. You see that there's no backing to it and there's no front to it. And I'm putting these 4 rectangles onto a layer called frame, this one right here. And you'll see why that's going to become important in a minute. And then similarly, on the back, here's my window backing. So if I double click on this, you see it's just a solid rectangle. What would have been if I come back here and I push this through 8 inches, it's basically this geometry that you see highlighted right here. That's what I'm calling my window backing. And what that does for me is, you can see if I'm looking at this window right here, this is the one we're working with, I cannot see through this window beyond, because if I come in here and I'm going to hide my window, you see there's this piece of geometry that's sitting in the way. Now I could, if I wanted to, just delete it. In fact, I'll hide it for a second. And you can see now I can see through my window. You see the difference between the 2 windows right next to each other? Like this one, I can't see the horizon line, and this one I can. So I just unhid the backing. So I actually created a layer called the window backing, and that's what this piece is on. So you can see right here, building window backing, and then I have my building frame. I guess really I can call it window frame, but either way. So what that does for me is now on my layer controls, if I want to turn my window backings on and off, and we'll get into why in a second, I now have them all controlled by a layer. So you see all of these windows are now see-through or not see-through. And where this really came about was for 2 reasons. So if we get back to this method of modeling, where you're doing a quick down and dirty model, it's just a paper model, there's nothing, even though this doesn't have really anything inside, looking through you would still see walls, where this, you're looking at this ugly blue background, there's literally nothing inside. That maybe I want to keep this window backing on so I don't see through my window into the model, so I can leave it turned on, because if I turn it off, and even more specifically, let's say I copy a series of windows over here. Oh, I copied on backwards, hang on. Just put a series of windows over here. Actually pull this a little closer just so it can be seen a little better. Looking through, you see how looking through the window, I actually see the whole window frame and all that kind of stuff, where it just doesn't look right. You're just seeing stuff you really shouldn't be seeing. And yeah, it could be a nitpicking thing, but by adding all this additional level of information into my block to begin with, it's no extra work for me to put together a clean model, regardless of how I'm modeling. So the difference now, if I put window backing on, you no longer see through it, but from my elevation standpoint, my window still looks correct. Versus coming over here, I probably want my window backing off so that if I have, say a set of stairs or something that I modeled in here, I'd be able to see through it properly. Or even more specifically, like if I have sliding glass doors back here and I'm looking out into a pool from the front door, I can see all that stuff and I want to see that stuff. So that was the first reason why I built this window backing, was so that I can work with these windows again in two different ways of modeling. And in if I do elevations, two-dimensional elevations, I don't necessarily want to see through the windows and see all the windows behind, because then it's just going to create a lot of odd geometry, and we'll really see more of that in a minute. So this way, when I do my 2D elevation views, I can put window backing on so I don't see through my windows. So hopefully that really starts to make sense. So the question was, if you create your own windows, would you set it up like these? Theoretically, yes. But the bigger answer I'm always going to give in a lot of this stuff is you build what you need to in the time frame that you have. So if like you're under a time crunch and you need a specialized window, you do what you need to do to get the job out the door. But in theory, you're either taking the time to build it correctly from the beginning, or when the job is done, you come back and rebuild it properly if you think it's a window that's going to be used again. If it's such a specialized window that you don't think it's ever going to be used again, it's really going to start to become your call of how you want to balance it out, between time wasted of something that will never be used versus time that will be put in now that we can gain in projects moving forward. And so then to talk about why I put this on a window frame layer. So again, if I turn it on and off, you see that window frame goes away. You'll see that there's still this loose geometry here, but this geometry is what is used to actually cut the wall. Again, not on this side, but on this side. So my frame is gone, but this geometry is still what's cutting this wall. So that will always be there, but it's really irrelevant if you see it or not, because you'll never really see it. So on a situation like this, when we're building a shelled paper model, you would always want this frame on, because see how this frame disappears and it looks like the window's floating? So I would want the frame on. But when I build this kind of model, where you can see this has the wall thickness, the reason why I would turn it off is because you essentially are overlapping geometry. Meaning if I go into my window group, you see I have this geometry, which is identical to, if I go into the wall, to this geometry. And for the most part, it's really not an issue until you get into renderings and or adding in materials. And I'm going to pull up just a brick material real quick to show really what's going on. So say we build, this is going to be a brick wall. So the brick would really return because it's a brick wall. That's just the way the brick is built. And if I have my window in here and my frames are on, do you see how that white is showing through and kind of flickering? It's because we have competing geometry, that we have a white geometry very identically superimposed over the brick geometry. And when you get into Lumion and do renderings, that could actually really start to cause an issue. So the way I came up with it, and it's a new earthing, so not all of my windows have them yet. I've just been doing it on the windows I've been using and slowly trying to add more. I can turn this frame off, and you see instantly I now just have this window sitting on the wall. So that's frame and window backing. Makes sense of why I have those and what they're used for? Perfect. So the next one, mullions, and this one came about because I never had a mullion layer. The mullions were just built as part of the window, and then we got in situations where all too often the clients were wanting to see if what windows would look like with and without mullions. Hang on one second. All right. So they want to see windows with and without mullions, and I had to go into every window and either hide them or delete them, and then go through and undo that process. Where even if I come here, you can see how many windows are in here. I mean, there's a lot of windows in here. I very easily can just come to the mullion layer and say no mullions, and every mullion turns off all at once. And it just became such a huge time saver of looking at options between mullions and non-mullions. So that's why that one's there. Now, the next piece of mullions is I've tried to put in, for lack of a better term, a generic setup of mullions, meaning that this, if I move this for a second, this is a grouping right here. This grouping is on, you'll see it, this is what's on the mullion layer. You can see it right there, it's on the mullion layer. Because if I go into the mullions, you can see if I select all the individual groups inside of here, these are all on layer 0. So getting back to the discussion we had about containers, the container itself is on the mullion layer, but the mullions themselves are just simply on layer 0. And that's because I like to work inside of this. I might need to add mullions or take mullions off. I never like having geometry itself on a layer. I like having containers on a layer, because otherwise I can really get into an issue where if I explode something, then geometry gets put onto a layer I don't want it to, and it just starts to really create a big mess. So I try to never put very specific things onto layers. I'll make containers that are on the layers. So I'm hoping that makes sense. So the reason why these are all just individual groups is now it's easy enough for me to say, you know, if in fact, let me undo this and put this back over top my window. You know, if everybody wanted to see what it looked like as a 4 mullion instead of 6, I can just grab this top one and move it down to the midpoint and erase this one, and there you go. If, you know, say we're doing some very traditional architecture and they want it broken smaller and they wanted 8, I can just grab this by its midpoint, you know, to the end, and I'll copy this all the way up to the end, and then do divide by 4, and then erase the top and bottoms, and there's your mullions by 8. So point being is there's a lot of control you have over the mullions by the way that this is set up. Just because the windows come in a certain way, it's not necessarily meant for the windows to stay that way. Just know that I try to make them as malleable as possible, that you can really control what you want to do with the mullions. Yeah, so I'll just undo this and go back to my original 6, I think it was. So far we've looked at the layers of, you know, frames, mullions, and window backing, and we've looked at the inside structure of mullions themselves. This always off, where that's coming in, it's a layer that, just as it says, it's a generic layer that I use in modeling, that something is always going to be off. It's never going to be on unless you need it for a reference for something. And we talked previously, if I come in here and let me just fix this one, since this one has not been fixed yet. I hadn't made the frame on here yet, so I was going to make that real quick. There we go. So if I turn my frame off, you see that this blue outline, like this is the line that's actually cutting the window. Those lines there, you know, for the most part are never going to be seen and never really an issue, so I just leave them on layer 0. They are what they are. I mean, there's going to be a line cut in the wall regardless of how you build your windows. But where it can become an issue is I've actually built these. These are corner windows. And if you look at it, you can see the window itself is just cut on a 45 so that I can put a matching mirrored window on the other side. And if I need to, I can just stretch it or whatever. And in theory, what's going to happen if you can see if I have my always off, if I turn my always off back on, you can see that this line right here, just this single line, is what's on always off. So when I turn off the always off, you can see that it actually looks like a nice clean corner. The only issue you have is this line, which is the corner of the wall itself. And so if you really just want it to be hyper clean about it, I can just draw a second line which cuts that line and add this to always off. And so these are windows that, just like before, I can move around and they cut the window out. But the way that they line up, they actually line up and look like you're creating a nice corner window. So that's what these are. Let's hear the other pieces, going back to my, let's hear 3060. So within here, as I talked about before, I have a component for, this is the window in and of itself. And then I have another piece in here, which is the window frame. And it's kept separate from the window, for a very specific reason, which is, in fact, if I come to my double 3060, it's because I need this window to be a window, to this window to match this one, and then this is its own frame. So the frame itself would change from window to window, so that's its own piece. So really, that's all the pieces to how I build a window. You can see it's really packed with a lot of information. In fact, if I can actually almost do like a exploded. Let's see here. Let me, just while I'm here, might as well take advantage and update these as I need to. Oops. Frame. So now I can just grab my frame and pull it back. So you can see how this window is broken down. I have my window backing, I have my window, what I call window frame. It's maybe a bad term because this is technically the window frame. So don't confuse them. Maybe I'll come up with a different name for this layer. Window surround or something. I mean, that's really what we can call it. Then I have the window in and of itself, the actual window frame, and then these are just the lines that cut the wall. So those are all the components, or all the pieces within the component. But that's not all. There's actually even more information packed inside of here. If you look at, if I go to my materials palette and go to the home button, obviously the glass itself has a material already painted on it. And then you'll see that there's these two white materials, one called window frame and one called window mullions. So if after I'm done building my model, Mitch is like, hey, I want to see all my windows in some sort of bronze material. You would have to go back, and I had to do this in front of clients, literally start painting every single window that I have, and it took forever. Where now, every one of these windows is actually painted this white color, so it's just this innocuous color that you don't even notice to begin with. But you see, if I edit this, and I'm going to turn it into this bright pink, you can see that literally every window in here has turned. So that if I had a very specific color that I wanted, in fact, I'm going to come here. This bronze right here is one that we use quite a bit for bronze windows. So now the problem is I want this bronze on every window. There's two ways I can do it. Obviously, I can either come to edit and just remember this RGB of 85, 48, 41, and I'll pull this up and change it to 85, 48, 41. And you can see that every window I have has changed to that bronze color. But I'm actually going to undo, because there could be even a faster way. There is a plugin called, there's this this girl, I think she's in her 20s, out of somewhere in the Scandinavian countries. She has the most plugins built by anybody. She just makes a ton of them. She makes a lot of very useful ones, and I actually use a lot of hers. Her name, I don't know if this is her real name or if it's just the on the screen name. I think it's eNorth, if I remember correctly. Actually, we'll pull up in a second, but it's one of the plugins I use is called Material Replacement, something like that. Whoops, this is the 3D warehouse, not the plugin, sorry. Go to extension warehouse, there we go. Come on. There we go. Let's see, which one is it? I don't think it's this one. This is by TomTom. Oh no, it is. I was wrong. It wasn't eNorth. It's by TomTom, which he makes a ton of them as well. So yeah, so this is the one you want. Material Replacer by TomTom. And it's great that I actually have F4 for whatever reason as my hotkey, so because I use it a lot. And what it's going to do, it brings up this eyedropper, and you can see that it's going to say replace, and if you can read that on the screen, it says DW frame, which is what my material is. So I'm clicking here, and I want to say replace DW frame with this, and then you'll see that it'll go through and find where DW frame is everywhere in my model and replace it with the bronze color. Again, there's a lot of that material in here, so it's going to take a second to go through all this. But it's just a great way, and I actually use this a lot. And we're eventually going to get into a class just on materials alone. So we'll talk even more about this one then. And obviously, if you guys have any questions before then, next days, weeks, or whatever, about this one, because it's a very useful material. Sometimes when we're doing roofs, Mitch will want to see, a roof that has the metal versus roof that has slate or whatever, that I can actually do a very quick material swap. And usually, this one's taking a second just because I think how big this file is. It usually happens, within seconds, and I can swap out materials very quickly that way. Sorry, so anyway, while we're waiting for this to come back up, we can actually start looking at our project. So remember, this is the project we're messing with. So I'm going to come here and, let's see, do I have where's my window schedule? I think it might be on here. Actually, it's on a notes page. It's on a different drawing. I don't need to open it. I know what these are going to be anyway. So let's even doing a quick just measurement of these. It's 4'9". That's weird. It's a weird dimension. I think this might have been single hung, so that's why. But either way, for our sake, I'm actually going to call these double 2660s just to make it easy on ourselves. So, some people. One of the first discussions we had when we started this process was I've seen people bring in the full AutoCAD file and draw over top of it. And again, I think that actually just adds so much information to the SketchUp model that doesn't need to be there, and it starts to create an issue, in my opinion. But it obviously brings in all the window locations, though SketchUp does not like our dynamic blocks, which Windows are dynamic blocks anyways, and I think that even causes an issue. I don't know if that's something that's been resolved or not, because it's been a while since I've tried to bring them in. But what I do anyway is I'll just actually, just grab this dimension here, so I know it's 5'6" from the corner. Let me see if my windows are back up. Yep. So anyway, so you can see that all the windows had changed colors. Let me see. I'm gonna there we go. So I just undid it so they're back to the basic white. So I'm gonna grab my my double 2660. So I'm gonna grab this one, copy it, bring it to my project, and place it on this wall. And I'm gonna bring it to this bottom right. If everybody remembers correctly, this was essentially my foundation slab. And before I merge it with my walls, which I'll eventually do just to get rid of that line, while I'm modeling, I like to leave it because it's really giving me my finished floor reference line. And so I'm going to add this window, this middle of the window right here at the corner, so that I know that I can bring it over this 5'6". So I'm going to slide it over 5'6" and up 8'2". And that's exactly where my window needs to be. And let's see here, we'll just quickly go through this. So this one is, I'm just going to call it, I think these are single hungs, that's why they're such odd dimensions. But I'm just going to call this a double 2040 over the bathtub. So go into my double 2040, so I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to throw it on this wall. And I'm putting the center point right on the wall, and then lining it up with this one, and then I know needs to be over 14'6". If the dimensions aren't already there, obviously you can just dimension it. These dimensions didn't exist. I'll just come through and do a quick, 14'6", and there we go. And at this point, I actually grab, whenever I have two of them in, I'll grab them and I'll make a group out of windows, just so I can work on windows if I need to. I like working, again, as I talked before, I like keeping everything in groups. In fact, I'm going to make all this stuff a group. There. And so now, once that's all in there, I'm going to come inside my wall group, and just do a quick rectangle around it, and push it through. And you can see now I have my walls or my windows looking through. And so just like that, you can see it'd be pretty quick in my estimation to populate all this. Back here, we'll just do this one real quick. So I'm going to call this a 3060. This will be my triple 3060. So go, that's my transom, so triple 3060 right here. And then come in the back. I'm just going to plop it in, and you can see I plopped it in outside of my group. It's just easier to put it down sometimes. I need to go over 8'2" and up 8'2", and then I'm gonna hit Control X to cut it, and then come inside my window group and Control V to paste it in place. Now I know we originally this house, in fact I can show you this house. If I go to the rear, this was just supposed to be a single beam height, but this rear, just to make things a little more difficult, we raised it up to 12. So I'm actually going to, which is good because I want to show you something else, that maybe this window I want to have a transom over it. And so since I put this one in already, maybe I want, I can actually switch it out real quick, and maybe it's easier for me to come in to here, do my triple 3060 with transom. And again, you can see triple 3060 with 20 square transom casement enclosure. So everything should be named properly. In this way, it just helps you find things. So there's two ways I can actually do this. I can do a Control Copy, come in here and paste it, and it should fit right over there, and that's where it would go. Or I can actually this is more of a, that's probably the fastest way in this case to switch out those windows and just delete the old one. But just to show you another way that you can do component replacements, I'm actually going to click on this one, go to Save As, and I just want to save this to my, on my desktop. I have I always have a dump folder. I have a delete folder. So anything that goes in here I know is junk. I have no intention on saving it. So I can clean this folder out anytime. It's just a good place that I could dump things very short term. So I'm going to dump this component into there. And now I could come in here. I'm going to right click on this window that I want to replace. And I can click on reload. And it's saying it's been edited. Do I want a different file? I'm going to say, yeah, I do want a different file. And I'm just going to navigate to my delete folder. And this is the one that I just saved out. And click open, and you'll see that it reloads that file. So that's just a good way that I can reload. So two things to be aware of. Say I had a multiple of these. In fact, let me just do that real quick. If I had a multiple of these, and I reloaded just this one, it's actually going to know that it's reloading anything that was named that. So you can see all three of these changed. Now, so know that if you reload one, it reloads them all. So it's reloading the component as a definition. If I undo and say I just want this middle one to have transoms, I can actually say come make unique. So it's giving it a new name, reload, and then I can reload it with that one. So only this one is getting reloaded. Make sense? So let's go back. I'm just going to reload this one real quick. So again, that wasn't necessarily the quickest way in this specific case, but it's just a good thing to know that you can actually reload things. And to get back to one of Felicia, one of your questions in the very beginning, as far as the importance of the origin point that I was talking about earlier, the reason why this reloaded properly is this actually has the origin point right here in the top middle. So because essentially this is the same window as the other one, it's just from this point up is different. So it's reloading by this insertion point, and that's why it reloads properly. So if this was not in the top center consistent in every window, then it would not reload properly. And not that it's a big deal, you would just have another step to recenter it and all that kind of stuff. So that's where that importance comes in. And so again, I just come back in here and I can move, cut my wall. So one last thing we'll talk about before we wrap this class up is the way we've definitely talked previously about where is it? This one. So we've talked about before how this type of modeling, the non-solid modeling, definitely has an efficiency about it with the way that I can just grab this window. Mitch says, hey, I want that window 6 feet to the right. You click it, move it 6 feet to the right, you're done. Where in the past, to do this, I had to move this 6 feet, come in here, grab this, move this 6 feet. And this is 2 steps versus 1 step, which definitely is a little bit slower. And it was always one of those things that was a downfall for me. I mean, there's always pros and cons to every single method you use. And so it's knowing those pros and cons for you to make the choice that is viable for you to model your fastest way. But luckily I've found that plugin, and we've talked about this plugin previously. It's this one right here, this stretch by area, which I use for whatever reason. I think alternate A. It's just an easy one for my left hand to hit that allows me, I'm going to hit X-ray just so I can see everything. I can select this whole thing and move this 72 inches to the left. So where this used to have, this method previously had an advantage over this way of modeling, that is now gone because I can just as fast move this window. and the wall. So it's just it's always trying to push limits of what we're able to do, which includes if I needed to make this window bigger, uh, I can actually just Control A, go across the bottom and stretch it down 12 inches, and now I have a window and a window opening that's 12 inches bigger. Yeah, I need to come back in here and actually update my mullions, but I can actually still do this from the outside as well, and just respace these, knowing if I went 12, then this one's 8 and this one's 4, and it's still properly spaced. So just that easy, I just adjusted my window. I'm going to undo that. Just we've spoken about this before, but just to be aware, if I make a copy of this and push this through. So now I have 2 windows. In fact, for whatever reason, this one had different head height. I'm just going to pull it up just to make it the same. Let me make sure that everything is right before I... Yeah. So if I pull this over here, if I click on this component, you can see it's my one. It's a single 2650 casement. If I click on this one, same thing. If I go to edit this, you can see I'm editing a component, so they both change. Now, if I were to stretch this like I talked about and go across just the bottom and stretch it down 12 inches, notice that this one on the left does not change. This is still my original component, which is the single 2650 casement. This one now turned into a single 2650 casement, you know, hashtag #1, because it made itself different because of using that plugin. Now that could be good or it could be bad, because maybe I want to keep this one as a 5.0, and so I can just come in here and just rename this to be 12660, and I'm done. And I can, like I said, adjust my mullions really quick. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's just knowing the implications of what you do that will change. So in fact, let me show one more thing that I think we can wrap this up. If I grab this, so I have another set of windows here. Again, these are both the original 2650 casements, and say I wanted both of them to stretch down. I'm actually going to jump inside the model, and I'm going to hide the window, because remember, this itself is a component. If I were to right here stretch this down, it would halfway work, but not fully. So I would stretch it down. Actually, hang on. This is there's one more reasons why this wouldn't work. Let me grab one more important piece. If I grab my double 2650 and put this here next to it, so again, this window block itself, these are all the same. This one's the same as this one, the same as this one, same as this one. Even though this is a double, this is a single. And so it's one of these things to be aware of, that the window in of itself is a component within a component. So now if I go inside the overall component and we're trying to stretch this, these here would not stretch. So this is still its single 2650, but this window here you can see created block #2. And this one did not adjust. And again, maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not. It's just you need to be aware of it, where in theory what I would do is hide this window, and then I actually have this button here with all layers on. So I usually click this, and what that does is it turns my frame, my window backing, everything on that I want to stretch. I stretch this down 12, and then I unhide the window, and then I can stretch the window down. So again, sometimes it's a little bit more work, sometimes it's not. It's all a matter of what is it that you need to deal with. And then here I just come in and grab these and move this 12 inches down. you know, of what it is that you want to deal with. That's all. So yeah, that's pretty much windows. I'll after we hang up, I'll probably go in and finish adding windows in. Oh, I want to do the tower. That'll be the last thing that we're done. I don't think there you go. The tower actually has a door. So I'm not going to open my doors right now, but I know it's an 8-foot with a 2-foot transom, and it is should be a 3-foot door. Yeah, so it's a 3-foot door. So really, I'm going to create what I have talked about previously as my my cutting block. So I'm going to create something. My door is going to be, it's a 3-foot door, so I know it's going to be 3 foot 4 inches because I have 2-inch buck on either side. And then it doesn't matter the other dimension. It really just needs to be big enough to cut the tower. So I'm just going to make it whatever. I know it's an 8-foot 2 door that actually has a 24-inch transom on top of it. So I just turned that into a group, and I'm actually going to rotate this 45 degrees because from here to here is my 3 foot 4 dimension. And now it's just a matter of where it needs to go. I'm pretty sure it's right at this. Yeah, it's 45 degrees from vertical. So I'll actually grab this midpoint, and I can put it to my roof because I know my roof is the dead middle. And I'm just going to move this forward until I'm intersecting the tower. In fact, I want to move it back just a little bit. And since we're off axes, I'm just using itself to copy. But this is a good time to show these over here. I believe we've talked about these before. I can, if I turn my axes on. In fact, let me hide the house. Hide this. So you can see these axes here, correct? This is my original origin of axes. If I click axes 45, it's actually preset to turn my axes on a 45 degree. And so before I could not move these on in axes because they were on a 45. They're actually on, I've essentially changed the red axis to be orthogonal to my 45, if that makes sense. So there's also a plus 30. Let me hide these. So if I go back to my axis 90, which is my original, there's a plus 30, so it rotates at 30 degrees, or there's a minus 30, so it's kind of like I've just added in some of the more common ones, essentially minus 30, plus 30, and 45, as well as original 90. So if you ever working on a house that has some typical odd angles, you know, sometimes we get into weird ones like 22.5 and all that kind of stuff. And I can show you how to make these another time if you have a project that requires it. And they've actually been very helpful on certain projects. But getting back to the point of this, if I grab this and I move the base of it down to the bottom, this actually would probably be a good time to make my tower. You can see that my door is a little bit taller than my original block line. So I'm going to merge the tower with these walls, and all that's doing is just, now this tower is part of this. It's no real big deal. If I need, it's easy enough to still work on if I had to. But now I'm going to cut this just so I'm inside of my wall group. And now using my solid tools, I can subtract this out of here. And there's my opening for my front door. I don't have a door right now to throw into it. I'd have to open a file, and that's easy enough to do. But you get the point that now I can just put my, my door would basically sit there just like that. Does that make sense? And that's why, just another reason for me that working with solids is so much easier. That explanation took a lot longer than what it takes to actually do it, because you can see you can just make that square, throw it in there, and cut your wall away. Same thing. I still had that in my my cut mode. So, say I'm putting a window up here, something like this, now I can actually just cut a window out and I can throw a window in there just as easy. And, if I undo, typically in towers, say we have, a multiple of them that are, let's see, I'll do one that's 45 degrees that way and one that's 45 degrees that way. I can just come in here and cut all these out, and then this window I think is going to be too big for it, but we'll add it in anyway. Just I'm just going to stretch it right now, or yeah, scale it. And I don't suggest scaling windows in general, but I'm just going to do it for this tutorial purpose, because this frame gets all distorted, in the way you're doing it. But just to show what I'm doing, now I can just grab this and rotate by my center, 45 that way, and rotate this one 45. I don't know why that one didn't rotate. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so just like that, I just put windows inside of a tower, which is usually one of the more difficult things to do. Next we can get into trims and all that kind of stuff on towers, and we'll look at that. That's a different discussion. But you can see at least the methods in which I think about and how I try to build, build my models. And I'm hoping that these continual additional layers really speak to the overall method and the choices I've made to make my modeling faster. Because I will be the first one to tell you there's a lot of what I do that does take a little bit more time up front, but in the long run, both in the medium term and the really long run, you gain so much more efficiency and information leading into construction drawings and all that kind of stuff. And that's really where we're headed with all this. So I hope that it's a lot of information. It's probably one of the ones that had the most information, but I hope that was easy enough to understand. It's all pretty straightforward, just a lot of information. Yeah, so any questions on? Okay. Well, all right. Yeah, no problem. So anyway, any questions on it, or? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm trying to make sure to record these, because ultimately, I think it's doing this class and having these discussions that we have is great to show you what is possible, because that's what really starts opening up, how you think about things. But it doesn't mean that you're going to understand it or memorize all the steps to make it happen right off the bat. It's going to be going back and watching it. I mean, there's a lot of tutorials I've watched multiple times just to fully grasp, what it is that they were doing. So yeah, please take advantage of all these recordings. I mean, that's why I'm doing it. So yeah, and as always, if you have any questions or whatever while you're doing it, feel free to give me a call. But yeah, so anyway, so I guess that's it. If you don't have any other questions, I think we're done. All right.